Hi, I'm Stephen Drunsic. Welcome to Q&A Live. I just want to thank you all for joining us. This is my inaugural show. I'm taking this over from Bob Stannard, who had a 7-year tenure, and I understand that's going to be big shoes to fill. On top of his humor and his good looks and charm, he did a great job at having engaging intellectual conversations, and I certainly hope I can continue the tradition for you. And with that, I'd like to introduce John O'Keefe. Thanks for being here, my first show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm surprised you actually managed to say yes. In any event, for those of you who don't know John, you know, everyone knows that you've been town manager since 2007, and you've obviously done, I think, a fairly fantastic job doing a lot of great things for this town. Just a couple of things I found interesting. I see you got your Bachelor of Arts degree at SUNY Potsdam, then you went on and got a master's degree, I believe, in history?
Public administration. I had an undergraduate in history.
Undergrad in history.
When I found out
how far did that go for you?
Well, I realized that there's not a big market for undergraduate history majors, so then I went back to school after going over to Europe for a little bit and working over there.
Where'd you go in Europe?
Ireland.
Okay.
Lived over in Dublin, and I had a series of increasingly interesting jobs. You want to expand upon, or? Probably the most interesting one was I was a security guard at for a company, and they did a lot of work with the Bank of Ireland, and they had sent me to this branch at one point that was like the premium. It was right on Grafton Street, which is sort of the very high-end street, and the orders were very clear. Motorcycle couriers had to take their helmets off before they went into the bank because it freaked out the tellers, and if the IRA came into the bank, I was to make sure everyone remained calm. I was supposed to help them fill up the bags with money, get the door for them, whatever.
So it's the IRA, right? They're probably coming in with plenty of explosives.
Yeah, they were apparently well armed.
Help them fill up the bags.
Help them fill up the bags. Get the door. Just make sure they get
out of the door.
Get them out of the bank. That was a really interesting one. That when I told my folks about that afterwards, they weren't impressed.
Did you have any issues? I mean, any events?
No, there really weren't any events. But they were, at the time, things were more active over there, and they had used bank robberies as a way of financing their activities.
Sure.
So it was a pretty easy mark. This bank was really downtown, very centrally located, so it probably wasn't a big mark for them. But it was a very interesting job, and so when I got back from there, I went back to grad school.
One point about the IRA. When I was in London, I did a semester abroad at LSE there a number of years back, and I remember walking around London, and I had some trash in my hand, and I couldn't find a trash can for the life of me. Finally, I had to litter. I dropped it in a tube stop, I think, somewhere. But I finally asked my friend who I was staying with why there were no trash cans in London. It's because the IRA used to target those and put bombs in them. Yep. So little fun fact for everyone, I guess.
Yes.
There. Okay, so you came back to the United States, and probably good Guinness drinking skills and Guinness pouring skills, and knew how to fill a bag of money. And then I see, which is interesting, you were a member of the senior staff of Governor Mitt Romney. Tell me how that came about.
That was interesting. I mean, when I went to grad school to be a town manager. When I got out of grad school, I got a job as a budget examiner for the state of New York, actually working in the Capitol building, not far from here, actually. And then moved to Boston and got involved working at the State House. But it was very interesting. I never, I wasn't involved in politics in high school or even in college. So it was almost the accidental political aid.
Accidental political aid. Okay.
Was, and one thing led to the next, and just like here, I always try to do a good job. Some people may find fault with certain decisions that you make, but career progressed, and I worked for the highway department later as their legislative director. And
was that during the time of the big dig, or was that precede you?
It was, but it was after they had taken the big dig away from the highway department, put it under the Turnpike Authority, which was a separate entity.
Okay.
But the chairman, who was eventually fired when the panel fell on the woman,
right.
He was the first commissioner that I worked for at the highway department.
Okay.
This guy by the name of Matt Amarello. And then one day at the highway department, the governor's office called up and said, "Oh, we'd like you to come up to the governor's office." And I said, "Oh, okay, let me talk to the commissioner." They're like, "Well, talk to him, but you got to come up today." And that was in January, right after the election. Wasn't involved in the campaign at all or anything like that. I was actually one of 2 people that lasted all 4 years. Everybody else came and went. The only other person that lasted 4 years was a guy by the name of Eric Fernstrom, who was the Etch-a-Sketch guy. Remember the comment that we're going to do the Etch-a-Sketch, shake up the campaign?
He was his campaign manager, actually, wasn't he?
Spokesman.
Right.
Spokesman. And him and
Forever
I were
in infamy, the Etch-a-Sketch comment.
Yes. Actually, that comment was very surprising. Eric just didn't make mistakes like that, but that was a huge gaffe.
Political tone deafness there.
It really was. I was really surprised because
I'm surprised he stayed on the campaign actually after that one.
He was, when in the governor's office, he was a really interesting guy. He was a press guy that really understood public policy and would understand all of the workings of state government. He was, a couple times some policy people tried to like pull one over on him, like just kind of like talk their way out of something. He's like, no, that's not true. He's like, I know this program and this is how it works. He really was interesting. A lot of public affairs folks, especially on the political side, don't really understand the process or government. So when he made the Etch-a-Sketch comment, I was kind of surprised. But him and I were the only 2 that made all 4 years.
So tell me, what was it like to work for Mitt Romney? I mean, in other words, the Mitt Romney that you worked for, did you see any variant of him in campaign mode when he was, campaigning for presidency of the United States, or did you see that he seemed to have changed, his demeanor changed, his policies changed? I mean, I think obviously being a governor of the state of Massachusetts, a fairly liberal state, and then him actually trying to seek the Republican nomination then, and then of course run as a GOP.
Yep.
Did you see glaring changes in his policy positions? I mean, that was one of the issues I think that were brought up.
In the governor's office, there was definitely, a tack to the right. Obviously, just like any other voter, I followed the campaign, and certainly over a period of time, there was definitely a gradual but noticeable shift to the right on a lot of different issues.
I guess which is necessary to get the nomination.
It is. I mean, it does leave the voters wondering, like, which one's the real, when he goes into the voting booth, what lever does he really pull? Is he pro-life or pro-choice? I mean, there was a lot of debate over that. And there were certain things that didn't really change. I thought, in the governor's office, personally, I thought we spent too much time focusing on social issues and not enough on actual fiscal issues. We didn't really push really hard for a tax cut, which I thought was always sort of the bread and butter of the previous governors, like Governor Weld and Governor Cellucci, were always pushing to return the state income tax to 5%. We didn't really spend that much effort. Every budget would have a tax cut in it, but it wasn't, one that was always baked on. It was always predicated on factors that the legislature would never agree to, like decreasing the amount of money that the state contributed to public health care, employee health care, which was a non-starter in the Democratic legislature. So all these different things that were put into the budget that funded the tax cut just weren't going to happen.
Would you say that Massachusetts tax policies are more progressive or regressive as compared to Vermont in your?
Well, it's interesting. Massachusetts has a flat income tax rate. It's constitutional, and several times it's I don't know what it is. I think it might be 5.3% right now. So everybody pays 5.3%. In the past, it's been proposed to the voters numerous times to have a progressive tax rate where the higher incomes pay more. It's been shot down every time by the voters.
Do you think it's something we should look at, perhaps looking into adopting here in Vermont?
Flat tax? I don't know.
Not to wait in the tax policy.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think, personally, I think doing your own taxes is becoming increasingly complicated.
Yep.
I think there's a lot of people out there that say, you know what, if I could pay 15 or 18% all year long, flat, no deductions, I think a lot of people would support that.
And have that apply to corporate entities too, maybe.
And corporate entities. It takes away that, it does take away that the ability to legislate tax expenditures to get people to do stuff that you want them to do.
Sure.
We want people to own homes, so we give them a mortgage deduction. Right. We want people to have kids, so we give them a dependent deduction.
Sure.
So we do use the tax code to get you and I to do things.
In specific industries.
Specific industries. Remember the energy efficiency tax credits?
Yep.
A lot of people put a lot of money into efficiencies in their own homes or their businesses based on that. And so I think there's a lot of good that comes from that, but it does, every time you do your income taxes, whether it's state or federal, it gets more and more complicated every year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think my tax return it's got to be over 70 pages deep, but That's probably more an issue of all the companies that I'm.
Yeah, multi-state.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I guess moving on, taking things back down to micro perspective here and what you do for the town. Obviously, there's a lot of duties you fulfill. You're the administrative head of all departments. You're the general purchasing agent.
Mm-hmm.
You're the collector of taxes. You can be knocking on my door. If I don't pay my property taxes, I can expect a visit from you.
That's right. That's probably the least popular job.
Overseeing street lighting.
That's right.
Interesting. Managing and maintenance of parks, which I must say you've done an excellent job on.
Thanks.
Adams Park in particular. One of my favorite things is, our office overlooks Adams Park, and on Thursdays when the farmers market is going, I can just walk out the door,
Mm-hmm.
and of course it always seems to be raining when
Yes.
the farmers market is on. But you're the acting road commissioner, obviously management of the police and fire department. You manage town licenses. You oversee the sewer system. You've got a lot on your plate, and I know when you came in 2007, I don't know if I can ascribe this to you or whether this was put in place concurrent when you came in, but it was instituted the reorganization of the Select Board's overall policy goal of reducing property tax spending while providing similar levels of service to taxpayers required new and creative ideas. So there's this whole reorganization process. What exactly went on back then, and how has it produced results of any kind?
The big thing, I guess the reorganization that goes back to, I guess it would be '08. The major piece was park maintenance, that we had a park maintainer who reported to the Parks and Rec director. Parks and Rec director was not typically well versed on maintenance items, so the maintainer of the parks would go to the director and say, well, what should I fix, or how should I fix it? I think that was a flaw in the system. The other problem was that there was a limited access to heavy equipment, and also a lack of a really deep bench of skills. So what we did is we actually took that person that was maintaining the parks, who was doing an excellent job, but moved him to the newly created Department of Public Works.
That's a new department as of 2008. Okay.
We used to have a road department, which
Okay.
certainly signifies you're in charge of the roads. That's it, roads
Right.
and sidewalks. We expanded the role. We promoted Jeff Williams to be the
Jeff.
Director of Public Works. And underneath him, he has Steve Casey, who's in charge of buildings and facilities and parks, and Jeff Sprankle is in charge of roads, and Jeff oversees the whole thing. What we were able to do there is, for example, at the park, in April, we're able to bring 4 or 5 people down to the park to clean it up. Heavy equipment, we have a backhoe, trucks. One that we use a lot is the sidewalk plow that we actually have been using to auger the holes for the fence replacement project that goes all the way around the park. So it was a great process. We had the public safety building, which was a very expensive building that we built, but really no maintenance plan or staff to maintain it. Fred Westner, the former chief, was in charge of maintaining the building. But that's really sort of taking the chief of police and putting him on a completely different path when you're saying to him, you got to figure out the furnace, you've got to change the light bulbs, for example. So we developed a better way to provide services. I think as a result, the park system has certainly flourished. Adams Park that you had mentioned was totally redone with volunteer labor.
So you essentially freed up resources and equipment that were being used in other departments, and by combining these departments, they had access to all the resources essentially. And
exactly.
Okay.
And now the person who's in charge of building maintenance now has a boss who's Jeff Williams, who is incredibly talented and very experienced. He can go to Jeff and say, I've got this issue, and Jeff is able to help him work through those issues versus going to the Parks and Rec director, who's largely a programmer, person who's in charge of programming and administrative functions. So it's worked out really well. It's allowed us to do a lot more work in-house versus contracting things out. And then the other piece that we put in play there is actually we created a human resource administrator, which has actually been a very good experiment. Typically in municipal government, if you're going to be sued, you're going to be sued by a former employee. And we put so much effort in municipal government into managing roads and trucks and plows and police officers and cruisers, but so little into actually having somebody besides myself that has all these different Managing all those things, exactly. Because of this, partly because of this, we've been able to switch healthcare plans and much more aggressively manage that. The cost increase, our costs aren't going down, but we're trying our best to manage them below what everyone else is doing.
So there's been some fiscal results, essentially, as a result.
Yep.
Have that, I guess, in terms of the total number of employees in 2008 versus today, I mean, how has that changed?
Actually, we added one person. I guess it's changed over time. It's gone down, it's gone back up again. We've been right around 30 for many, many years, actually. We did add 2 folks, one back onto the books, and then we had a newly created position. We added under the Parks and Rec director, a director of programming, Kate McClafferty, who's done a great job for us. She was a part-timer before that. And then we added Andy Bourne.
Lee Crone's, is that who I'm thinking of? Who's helping with Lee Crone?
Matt
I might
Daskell.
be thinking of someone else. Seems there's a recent position they were going to be helping, assisting Lee or helping.
Yes. That's actually filling the HR. Our former HR administrator left, moved back to Michigan, and we hired somebody to take her spot, guy by the name of Matt Daskell. He was a younger guy. He has a master's degree from the Maxwell School of Government, Syracuse University, former town manager in Westminster. He's doing HR and operations type functions. He's done a lot of work with our server, for example, that we're getting up and running. Something that we'd otherwise have to contract out more services for, but he's able to do it in-house. And then the other one is we brought on another guy under the Department of Public Works. Because as we built the pool house, for example, that needs to be cleaned a lot. So every single morning, the new employee that we hired goes in, cleans it at 6:30 in the morning, 6:30 in the morning, and then before he leaves, cleans it again. So that building's being cleaned twice a day, all those bathrooms in there. We're seeing results. I mean, it is very difficult to keep that building spick and span clean, but we've gotten very few complaints about the cleanliness of the building as a result of that twice-a-day cleaning. Now, in the fall and winter, obviously, we can decrease that to once a day.
That obviously brings me to some of the larger projects that have been going on. Obviously, everyone knows about the roundabout. You know, we've had the Park House, which I think is fantastic. The work that's been done down on Depot Street, Manchester 2020, the Street Festival, which I've heard fantastic things about. I'm sorry I wasn't here for it. You know, let's start with the big one here, the roundabout. I think going into that, there was a lot of apprehension, particularly by some of the merchants, the adjacent stakeholders, about whether this would really eat into their business and whether this would be dragged out. I mean, obviously, this is a project that's been on the books for, what, how many years? You know, it's
20, 25, 30 years.
I think actually my father was involved in the initial discussions when they thought about this. Just, you know, from a 10,000-foot perspective, what's your impression of how this project's gone so far?
You know, well, I think we made a lot of key decisions that could have been bad decisions. They turned out to be good decisions. You know, people were very anxious about the project. You know, I have to tell you, in April, when we signed the contracts, I didn't sleep well that night.
I'm sure. I mean, perhaps rightly so, right? Because there are a lot of unknowns about how this was all going to play out.
I mean, did we make a terrible mistake? You know, we signed the contracts. There's no going back at that point. And, you know, was this going to be a bad move?
I mean, was there ever a thought that what if we had gone through this entire process and people just couldn't navigate it around 2 traffic circles and it made things worse? Did it ever enter your head?
Yeah, I mean, it did. It did. And, you know, 2 traffic circles are very unique. Dave Cannell, I'm sure you know Dave, had a very interesting idea that he wants to do go-kart races around.
That's a good idea, a little F1, a mini F1.
Yeah, a mini
for
F1.
Manchester.
Include a lot of hay bales, so we're still figuring out how to do that. But yeah, I mean, there were so many variables. I mean, we picked a really good engineering firm, Boswell Engineering, and this guy, Jason Waysville, did a great job staying on top of the project, taking time off. You know, it was originally a 3-year project, and we essentially got it done in 1 year. Tricia Hayes we hired as the public information officer.
Yep, she's done a great job keeping everyone informed. I think that's been excellent, actually, is that the informative aspect of keeping everyone up to date, what we can expect, I think is, I mean, kudos to her and you and whoever put that in place.
You know, that was a really interesting piece. The state had agreed that we needed a PR person for this position, that it didn't have to be full-time. But the interesting thing is that the typical way it's handled is you just hire a consultant and we'd had consultants on projects like this before, and they really weren't on the ground. They really weren't able to talk to constituents. It was just more putting together press releases and sending stuff out. And we had talked to the state AOT, who's actually, we were able to convince that we should be able to hire a town employee, a part-time employee that would be funded by the federal government, and that this would be, first off, it'd be cheaper for the federal government, and secondly, they get a much better product. And we put together a proposal, and they accepted it. And we're actually working on a white paper for AOT, trying to convince them that they should use this model more often. So, I mean, that was a really key decision. We also tried to make the project interesting and fun. So we had Super for a Day, where we actually brought down some MEM students and actually gave them tours of the project. We did public tours of the project, and actually people showed up.
Yeah, I mean, and there was also a webcam, I believe.
Yeah, there's a webcam. Yeah.
I mean, I think the most incredible thing from a historical perspective is seeing that beautiful marble archway, which no one ever had visual access to prior to them uncovering it. It certainly was definitely fascinating. I mean, looking at the plans as they were drawn, it was hard to imagine how are they going to put that big traffic circle.
Where's
there.
it going?
Where's it going to go? How are they going to fit this? But obviously, they managed to make it work. This contractor, W.M. Schultz,
Yep.
I mean, what's your impression of working with them?
They did a great job. I mean, they put a lot of assets into it. That 10-day closure that we had in September, they worked 24 hours a day for 10 days straight. Basically did over a month's worth of work.
Yeah, it was kind of cool coming down at night and seeing everything. It was almost like a movie set.
Oh, it
was really, really wild.
Going back to the bridge for a second and kind of back to the DPW department, the blocks that we took off the bridge, because we had to saw cut and remove blocks, we're actually going to use those blocks to create a stage of the town green. Select Board voted the other night.
Great idea.
And a lot of them were numbered. So you could see what was interesting about those blocks is they weren't just chopping pieces of marble out of the ground and then throwing them up on here and hoping they all fit in. They were actually custom cutting those pieces. So when we build the stage, we're going to try to have those numbers exposed.
Where'd that marble come from?
That marble we think came from Dorset.
Okay. Freelyville, or maybe the quarry and the...
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I never really got a good read on that. We had some discussions. The Historic Society came down and they took a look at it as well. It's interesting to see the bridge sort of deconstructed.
Yep.
Because you realize what went into it, and even just the numbering. Like if we went out and started to try to build a marble arch bridge, I would assume we'd just be fitting pieces together,
right,
and hoping that they worked out. I mean, this was just this was just. I mean, it was really they really had a plan.
Yep.
And they had the skills to do it. I think today it'd be pretty tough to build a bridge like that.
Any artifacts that were uncovered too during that process?
No, like just a horseshoe.
Yeah.
We found one horseshoe.
Yeah.
Had fallen off a horse at some point. We did return that piece. There was a piece out on North Road. At North Road in Mount Aeolus, there was a monument. It's 18 inches by 18 inches by, well, it varies how much is in the ground, and it had the 3 select board members, and it said erected 1912, and it had 3 select board members, and that was it. So we actually pulled that out. That was actually one of the original pillars to the bridge that had anchors for the railing. We moved it. The Mahar Funeral Home won the bid on it and moved it and cleaned the stone. What was interesting though is when we took it out, and it almost tipped over the truck. I mean, the winch had a tough time pulling this piece of stone out. When we reset it, at the bottom was the builder's name that had built the bridge that we'd never seen for years because it was covered in debris.
Huh.
But that was one artifact that we brought back down. That now sits in the town green.
Okay.
That's a pretty neat piece of stone.
Let's check that out. One of the other things, that you obviously did a lot of utility work. In fact, the whole beginning part of the construction process was a lot of, cutting, installing new utilities. Does some of that tie into this phase 2 project where you're going to backlot all these utilities and get all these guidelines and wires out of Main Street's view, essentially?
So the original plan was to do it all.
Right.
And then when the estimates came in, they were too high. We had gotten, town meeting appropriated $462,500, and the state matched that through a creative agreement that we put together with them.
Just for backlotting?
Just for backlotting.
Okay.
We'll be under that number when it's all said and done. So at that point, when we knew that we couldn't afford it at that $925,000, we split it. Worked with the different companies and said, okay, how can we split this up? What we see today is actually the bulk of the investment, yet foot for foot of lines being removed, the least amount of impact.
Right.
The second phase, which is built on top of the first phase, is cheaper but has a much better impact. What it will do is it will remove the utility lines from the Mountain Goat all the way up to Merchants Bank. And then we'll route the power back down around School Memorial.
And when do you see this happening?
We're getting estimates right now.
Okay.
From the different companies.
So maybe 2014 or?
I'm hoping soon.
Okay, but the money's already been allocated, so it's not like we have to go back to the
that
town.
money hasn't been allocated yet. We still have some money left in the UDAG authorization. So we have some money left. I don't think it's enough at this point.
Okay.
It's not a lot of work, though. The major piece of work, there's two big elements. One is running a new transmission line for power up School and Memorial. The other piece is, as you remove the poles from Main Street and put them behind, well, the fuse boxes and everything, all the connections and everything are in the front of the building. So now you got to do a lot of interior work in these buildings. That when you're dropping lines on the back, it's something that I never had thought about before. But when you take a line from the front to the back, now you've got to get that power to the front or move the panel. Or there's a lot of logistics.
I mean, why couldn't you have just buried everything?
Burying is the most expensive way to go.
Okay, so it's a cost issue.
Cost issue, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and there is some buried utility lines back around Morrow's property in Hand. They were buried through there because it was the only way to get it through there.
Okay.
So there is some buried lines there. But mostly we routed stuff down Cottage and Wyman. And then, of course, Fred the horse pulled the telephone line behind Factory Point Town Green. And then we've got some utility lines running down the old Main Street behind the Mountain Goat and Berkshire Bank. So that's sort of how we've been able to get.
I'll tie that in later.
Yep.
Because there's something I want to bring up. Because to some extent, it's great to get these lines off Main Street, but on the other side of the coin, we're basically pushing it to another vantage point, which may tie into this whole development of the river corridor, which I want to talk to later on.
Yep.
One of the things that I've noticed, and I guess just some questions for you, if you walk around, some of those brick pavers, they're already starting to deteriorate.
Right, yep.
And I saw you guys out there. I don't know if that's what you're looking at.
It is.
But is that a consequence of improper PSI concrete, or is that just our snowplows?
Just our snowplow.
That's not even a year.
I know. Yeah, that's disappointing. We do have a way to cure it.
Okay.
Which is to reseal the concrete. Right now, what you're looking at is the sealed concrete with the red brick pavers, and then what the plow blade, because when you do the brick impressions, it's supposed to look like real brick, so it's somewhat uneven.
Right.
So when the plow blade comes along, it's sheared
the
off.
edges of it. Yeah.
So Jeff Williams is already, or if he hasn't, he is going to get a new plow blade, which is a rubber blade.
Yeah.
It will have some impact though on our ability to get the sidewalk completely bare. But I think in the grand scheme of things, it's going to be better off. And then there's a product that you put down that seals the concrete. Once we can seal it back up, then you'll have what will look like just normal bricks again. So there is, what you'll see in the end is not as bad as it looks right now.
And here's something else. So now I think everyone has questions about these final kind of punch list items, and they've been doing a lot of scarifying at night. But here's the funny thing. Is that a top coat that's in town right now? Because it looks a lot coarser than a normal top coat.
Yes.
And also they're painting right over the scarified portions. Is that now?
Painting over it? Like in that scarified? Yeah, the paint is actually supposed to be in those.
Okay. But that's new now? They just scarify and they don't pave over? That's just removing the old paint essentially?
That's an interesting, it's not to remove the old paint, it's so that the paint lays in there so the plow blade doesn't peel it up.
Ah, okay.
So it's a thermoplastic paint, but then it's inlaid into that scarified pavement. The pavement is a lot coarser, and there's a type 1 and a type 2 pavement. What was spec'd out on this job was, I think it's a type 2, which means it's a coarser ride. It's a little less smooth, but it also has a longer staying capacity. So for one reason or another, that's what the engineer had spec'd. Okay. Was this coarser material.
Okay. Well,
I think especially, I had friends when I was younger that skateboarded, and of course that type 1 is really, that's like the real smooth pavement. You can tell the difference between one and the other.
You guys also experimented with that chip.
Yeah, the chip seal,
Chip seal on Richville Road, I believe, and I think even on Barnumville Road. And I think I sent an email to you about that. Like, what is this stuff? Yeah, I mean, it's okay. We're paving this year. We're paving West Road. We got a state grant to pave West Road, and we should be starting that soon. And we did Powderhorn. We went back to just a traditional mix. Okay. And I
can't remember if we did the type 1 or the type 2 mix on that one. I remember we had a conversation.
So West Road and Powderhorn, that's what's on the
Powderhorn's already done.
Okay.
And then West Road will be done shortly. The village also picked up a grant to pave that, so all of West Road from Seminary in Maine all the way to Bond Street will get paved.
In front of the bookstore, there's a section, it's filled with stone right now, but it looks like it would make a great spot for some green space and park. Is there any plans to do anything with that? Is that just kind of in a holding pattern right now, or do you know what I'm talking about?
That's not town property, so I don't want to.
That's bookstore property.
That's bookstore property,
Okay.
but I know that the Morrows are working on a plan to create public space there,
Okay.
Including bringing back the famed Jefferson statue.
Oh, right. That's right.
Which was actually pushed up against the building. Now he comes out, and it's actually a four-sided piece of art.
Mm-hmm.
So now we'll enjoy all four sides of Jefferson, not just the front of it. So they are working on that. And we've been talking to them, the Morrows, about how that would fit in. We have some little bit of landscaping that has to be done between the sidewalk and the curb. So our interest in working with them is, for one thing, is that we can coordinate those landscapings, the stuff that will be on their property and the stuff that's on ours. So, we don't want to have daisy. This is a bad example, but my landscaping skills, anyone who's been to my house realizes what my landscaping skills are. We wouldn't want to have daisies on our section and formal roses on theirs. We want to make it look like somebody actually thought this through.
Yeah, some congruency.
Exactly.
Okay. I've got a million other questions, but I guess I have to move us along here because we're starting to eat through our time. The Park House, another big project, another fantastic result. Obviously, again, there was some pushback for obvious reasons relating to the budget and taxes. Your impression of how that project came out?
We kind of backing up a little bit here. The select board put together a committee. Of course, your father was on there. We put together a really interesting committee, and a lot of times, we could have ended up with a camel, the horse built by a committee. We didn't. It was a really interesting process. It was your father, Bill Drunsic, Lisa Souls, Dave Cannell, who's a builder, Bob Johnson, who was in manufacturing, is on the rec committee, Dennis Marchetti, who's the president of the swim team, or was the president of the swim team association, but also an engineer that moves heavy, does a lot of work for Amtrak and for New York City stage productions, all that stuff that gets moved around.
Yep. He
does a lot of heavy stuff. So Mike Kilburn was on there. I'm going to forget somebody. Pauline Moore, myself, and Liz served as staff for it. So we put together a really interesting. Alan Benoit was on there as well. I know I'm going to forget somebody, but I guess I ran that risk.
I'll get him on my next show.
By starting to name them off, I set myself up for failure there. But put together a real group of people who this wasn't their first rodeo. This wasn't the first building that they built. Went through a selection process on architects. We had settled on Breadloaf. We were looking for somebody that had built a public bathroom before. And once we started doing this thing, it was actually interesting. I was at the mall in Albany, and you start to look around like, okay, how's this public bathroom built? Like, what's the material? What's the floor made out of? What's the durability factor? Do they have, what kind of hand dryers do they have? So we went through actually a pretty accelerated process. We created that committee. This is 13, 12, 11.
Did that come out of the community center concept that evolved, or was developed a number of years ago? Or?
We looked at everything. We looked at an indoor pool. The first thing, of course, we had to figure out was, we had to figure out whether the old building could be salvaged. Brought in some experts to take a look at that. There were a lot of issues. A lot of people had suggested we should just rehab that. Everything from ADA access. The doors were right up against a wall, which can't be for handicap accessible reasons. So the whole building would have gotten blown up, poorly insulated, poorly constructed. As far as layout, there's a whole litany of issues that were going on with the old building. So we finally crossed that off the list. Said, rehab existing building.
Tear it down.
Cross that off.
Okay.
Yeah, tear it down. And so then we had to define, like, what is it actually that we're building? What can we afford? We had a lot of debate over on this committee about the community room or the activity room, which is about 900 square feet. Actually, if you went down there right now, the summer camp program is in there.
So it's getting utilized already.
Oh, a lot.
Okay.
A lot. And then we started looking at the price tag of the building without that, and we were building a really expensive seasonal building with a lot of bathrooms. And we said, well, that doesn't really make sense to build a building that costs under $1 million or about $1 million. It's only going to be used during the summertime. And the goal was always, the old building was always called the Pool House.
Right.
And we had intentionally called this one the Park House because we wanted it to be more than that. So went through a lot of different layouts. The most dramatic discussion we had was with Mike Kilburn on the bathroom layout, sort of how the bathrooms are stacked up against each other, so you can have 4 bathrooms accessible from the outside to the inside, and provide a lot of flexibility. That came out of the fact that we couldn't afford bathrooms on both sides of the building. They were just too expensive. So as a result of this committee, we formed this in August of 11. We were able to come up with conceptual design before town meeting of March 12. Money to design the building was done in 12. No, let's back that up. Was it 10, 11, 12? Well, basically, not this town meeting, but the town meeting before, we approved a bond for $1.5 million to build this building. So a very quick process as far as like how quickly we actually figured out what we wanted to build. We had a lot of issues that came up that I think we handled well. Sustainability was a big issue. The building should be sustainable, it should be efficient.
LEED certified.
This one isn't necessarily LEED certified. There's a lot of elements in there because you pay a lot for LEED certified. And the committee said, well, do we want to have it certified versus put these things in? Like the propane furnace down there, we made a decision to replace the old one, the old oil burner. This one is 98% efficient. And actually, interestingly, it cost just as much to buy a new propane furnace and install it as it would have to reinstall the old oil burner because there's a lot more involved in oil, and it's more efficient. It'll cost us less money. The bathrooms we really wanted made out of durable materials that were easy to clean. Floor drains and all of those. We actually have a hot water spigot, hose bib in the bathrooms where you can actually hose everything down, and it all goes into center drains. Easy to maintain. Metal roof, we didn't want to replace a roof again. We just replaced the public safety building roof that's asphalt shingles. So we went with a metal roof. So anyways, it was a real interesting project.
Did it come in within budget?
It did, yeah.
Okay.
Yep. We added some more money this past town meeting to finish some things that we wanted to put in. There's a gas fireplace in the activity room, which obviously isn't being used today. But that'll be a great element, as far as winter programming and be able to go in there and warm up.
And is there interest in using this facility? I mean, have groups come
and
approach the town? And
yeah, we've already done, it's available for private functions.
Okay.
We did Restaurant Week kickoff, actually.
I was there.
Yeah, that was a great event. That's something that we're interested in repeating. We use it a lot for programming. So yeah, it's being well used, especially in the fall. We have some interest in doing, the Leos have offered to donate a Wii. We're actually interested in doing an intergenerational bowling league with young kids from MEMS and older seniors.
Any handicapping process involved there, or?
Well, it's interesting. My daughter.
Actually, it is Wii, so I mean.
It is Wii. My daughter, who's 7, I told her about the program, and she said, "Oh well," and she thinks about it for a second. She always figures out a way to try to make things work for her. So she was assuming that the MEMS kids would be really good at bowling. And that the seniors wouldn't be good. And I was like, well, I don't think that's how it works.
Yeah,
so she's like, well, why don't we do kids teams versus senior teams? And so we went to visit my grandmother, who's 93 years old, over in
She outbowls the
Albany.
best of them?
What's that?
She outbowls the best of them?
I don't know if grandma bowls, but we were walking by, and she's in one of these independent living places. There's like a hairdresser, there's a coffee shop, and there's a Wii bowling room. And
why not?
We're watching them bowl, and it's like strike, strike, strike.
Crushing it.
Over and over again. She's like, maybe this isn't a good strategy, like kids versus seniors.
Yeah.
But anyways, we do have some interest in doing some things that are more social in there as well. So it's a great space. It's really worked out well. The precision walking program that we have, that's a senior-based program. I used to drink coffee kind of out in the hallway, and now they've got this nice room to use. So it's really worked out well.
Yeah, looks great. And of course, you got 4th of July there tomorrow. So any special things going to happen tomorrow?
Hopefully it doesn't rain.
Yeah, that's true.
But
did we have rain out last year? I think we did.
It was bad last year. It was a nasty thunderstorm. Actually, one of the worst I've ever seen.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping for no rain tomorrow. The forecast still looks a little mixed. It's a tribute to Wendy Cram. Actually, Wendy's was in the hospital. Now he's in rehab. I've been talking to Joe Charbonneau, who's the rehab has agreed to release him for this event. It's a tribute to him, the Olympics, the 10th Mountain Division that he served in. So it's a real nice piece. We have Wendy actually talking on the audio. Greg Cutler, who you know,
of course,
put it together with another guy, Ryan McBride. I don't know if you know Ryan.
I know.
Both these guys volunteer their time. It really is kind of overkill. You've got a professional voice actor and a guy who does Hollywood sound engineering working on this little tiny 4th of July tribute.
And hopefully we have fireworks to back it up.
Hopefully, yeah. Hopefully they're not wet. And then this year we've added the grand finale is the overture of 1812, and we've actually added two black powder cannons to the mix. So we'll see how that works out.
Oh, excellent.
There's 2 sets of volleys in the audio, so there'll be, partway into the song there'll be 2 shots, and then they'll reload quickly. They got 2 minutes, and then they'll shoot them off again.
They should do that every day for lunchtime.
That's just
cannon
like
boom.
If you've seen Mary Poppins, in Mary Poppins, there's one of their neighbors shoots off cannons every day. Yeah, it'd be nice.
Why not?
Yeah, why not, right?
Why not? God, we're getting tight on time here. Obviously there's a Depot Street. I think that's a fantastic project. That's, basically it was redeveloping that parking lot. But what other specific investments have been made in that area to kind of isolate it as a kind of a within town community destination, and have the merchants down there seen any benefits from this process?
Well, yeah, we've been talking to them. The parking lot, we pulled in all the neighbors and businesses and made sure that the parking lot worked for them. That was the first big element. It was really kind of a crazy little hole in the ground that we had dug there. There was an old movie theater there that Ivan Beatty's uncle, great uncle I think, was killed in. He was a projectionist.
Was killed in it?
Was killed in the fire, yep.
Oh.
So you've got on one piece of the parcel, you've got when the building burned down, we just collapsed it in and then started paving over the top. So obviously as time went on, things started rotting.
Right.
And the building setting, and that's where you could see that box almost in there. Then right underneath the sign, right on the corner, we were digging and we found actually a beautiful laid up marble well that was about 16 feet deep.
Dating from?
Horse and buggy days. We don't know, but it was beautiful.
Horse and buggy days, it's a long period of time.
Yeah, true, true. At least the 1800s.
Wow, okay.
Then over on the other side of the property, we found a driven point well that the state made us dig all the way down and try to find the bottom because they were concerned there was an oil tank under there, but it turned out it was just a
So you didn't trigger any archaeological provisions to stop your dig? And
No. We did find petroleum, of course. It seems like everywhere, but not a major amount. So get everything cleaned up. We repaved that, and I think it's a much nicer. The town, embarrassingly, owned the worst parcel in the neighborhood. So we cleaned that up. We now have Wi-Fi in that neighborhood that connects to the rest of the town Wi-Fi system. And then we also installed. We heard from the businesses that they really felt like people didn't know there was a whole neighborhood back there. So we put in signage out at the highway signifying that there's a historic district back there and that there's certain things, like we've got a shopping symbol, parking, food. So telling folks that are visiting from outside town that there's a whole neighborhood back there. We've worked with Lee Crone and Pauline Moore in my office to make sure that we can try to develop this neighborhood as sort of the off the beaten path business district. You've got Andrew the Glassblower down there, you've got Al Ducci's, you've got Ramsey Gord, you've got Robin Lane, you've got the radio station. So you've got a lot of interesting locally owned businesses that are very organic,
in original preserved buildings too.
I
think it's a really fantastic, nice little area, and it's unique. And again, kudos to all of you who have been involved in those efforts. Where did the funds come from for that? Was that out of the general fund?
Actually, the parking lot was part of a bond that was issued for Highland Ave. So it was part of a much bigger project, the Highland Ave Sewer
utility.
Drainage.
Okay.
Yep. And then the Wi-Fi was part of a budgeted item, and then the signs just came out of general operations. But we continue to talk to them to make sure that we're supporting that neighborhood down there. It's one of our 3 historic districts that we have. Sort of tie that into the other area that we thought was really interesting. And a little bit off the beaten path versus not being right in the junction was that Adams Park area that you talked about. That's why we wanted to put the farmers market there, is really felt with all these different businesses. You got the 2 sign shops, you've got...
So you get the spillover effect of having that market, yeah.
Yep. And George from Wines at George, he's told me he sells more wine on Thursday.
Yeah, it's funny. I was out at H & Williams on Sunday too, and the amount of foot traffic in his store as a result of having that. I mean, it's got to be enormous. So, and hopefully that works at the Adams Park Thursday market as well. Skipping here, Manchester 2020. What a fantastic stroke of luck for this town to be selected. I actually personally sit on the Riverwalk committee. Something near and dear to, I think, a lot of people's hearts in this town. Obviously, what I'm talking about is, we've got this fantastic, beautiful, famous river that runs right through the center of our town, and unfortunately, it's underutilized, and there's a certain bit of urban blight, if I could say, because you're looking on the back side of the bank building there, and I think there's always been in a lot of people's minds a desire to take advantage of that, what really is an asset in town, an underutilized asset. And
you got a stroke of luck recently. The bowling alley and the shopping plaza have been sold.
To some hedge fund group out of tech, or
no, this is a different. This is Crosspoint is the name of the company that bought it, and they own a lot of small community shopping centers.
Okay.
The purchase price was about $6.8 million.
And what are their plans?
Well, they had an initial plan that they had brought forward before they bought the property, and then they pulled those plans and then renegotiated the contract, and now that they've bought it, we expect that they'll be back in. But their plans were, at the time, were to redevelop a better, larger price chopper, move around some of the pieces. We've expressed to them our feeling that a movie theater in town is extremely important, and that we would have gone through as a community this entire process to support the movie theater. So they're aware of that. So I think that you're going to see a lot of activity.
What about this bowling alley building? I mean, has there been any discussion as to what they're going to do with that? Raise that, develop it? I mean,
I think
they're
looking to
shell, really.
It is. I think I think the interest is in redeveloping that building and making it more accessible. By developing a better price chopper, there's an opportunity to make that more front and center, so it's not sort of this building that's tucked around the back. Potentially
kind of the, let's say, the entranceway for maybe a potential river walk.
It is.
So, I mean, I guess my question to you is, the way I envision it is actually to have, paved walkways along that river and doing a lot of clearing and rebuilding that ugly embankment, which is just basically spillover material behind the bank with granite blocks or something to hold that embankment up, and then of course maybe a couple of nice bridges that go across there. Of course, you're working around the Battenkill River.
Right.
What do you see as potential roadblocks for any group that's organized and want to try to pursue efforts to develop that corridor there?
Well, there's a couple.
From the town, from the state.
Before I forget, we have thrown out the idea of having like some sort of cafe that would tie in to the Riverwalk, sort of back at the bowling alley building. But I'm sure people have a lot of great ideas. The big challenge is, I think, floodways, flood zones.
It is all flood zone down there.
It's all
so is actually much of that that parking lot down there.
Yes, the flood's in there as well. So I think there's that challenge. What kind of materials are we going to use to build the path? If it's a gravel path, chances are it's going to be washed away. We've gone down there with our town engineer, and we've talked to Bill Labarge, who's the chair of your committee. We'd love to see, but some of it is handicap accessible issues, possibly not. We'd love to see the river span and the ability to get back up to the town green and make that loop.
Right there in front of the Kimball Martin building too, which is a beautifully restored mill building, which I think, the vantage point down there and looking up at the of course we've got a waterfall right there too, and I think it'd be something to pursue. So the town has expressed interest in pursuing something of this nature. Okay.
So we just got to figure out. I mean, the committee is doing a lot of work. I know you've been going to meetings, and so we're sort of curious on how things. We put together this whole 2020. I guess I'll give you the highlight of the things that came out. The river walk,
right?
Biking as a destination,
incubator,
and higher education.
All equally important with this.
My sense, we want to provide the leadership where people think we need to, but at the same time, it's supposed to be this organic movement where, keeping true to the whole process of coming up in a democratic process to figure out where does the community want to go. want to make sure that we give all these different committees and that we're not subverting their efforts by sort of saying, okay, now that we've put together a committee, let us tell you what the committee should decide. I mean that seems like that's the wrong.
But I guess out of that approach, out of this whole effort, are there going to be some funds that come from the state to, continue the momentum? Because there's obviously a lot of momentum behind all these committees right now, but without, I guess, some funding sources either from the town or the state, and there's a potentiality that the momentum could slow, and we really want to keep that momentum going. So, what kind of support, both financial and administrative, could we expect? Well,
one thing we've done, we talked to Brian Keefe, who was the chair of the whole Manchester 2020 process. We've authorized Tricia Hayes, who was our, she's now a couple days out of work on the roundabout project on June 30th. We didn't want to span her into another fiscal year, so, but we've sort of transferred her to a consultant basis, and she's going to be doing the work with Brian Keefe to make sure this whole thing is organized and that all the different committees are talking to each other and that all communication is going out, that people know what's going on. So that's the first thing that the town committed. Next to that, now we've got to figure out what is it that we actually want to do. I've been sitting on the higher ed pieces. I know Lee and Pauline have been going to meetings as well. So, like on the incubator piece, one of the discussions that's being had there is, what is the incubator? A lot of people would like a food incubator where maybe it's not an incubator, but it's actually like a commercial kitchen that people could use. Food is certainly a big piece of our history, but also I think going forward, a big reason why people visit Vermont is because of our foods.
Vermont products, locally produced, locally sourced,
locally cooked.
A lot of brand value, locally cooked. Yeah.
If it's made in Vermont, there's a certain.
Well, maybe if the town took over the bank building, or the bank gave the building to the town, that might be a good.
Well, there's a couple key parcels that we've identified. One is the bank building.
Yeah.
We have been talking to the bank about both the condition of the current bank. It certainly needs a paint job, and we've expressed that interest, and also. Encouraging the bank to figure out what the building will be, either selling it or repurposing it or becoming a steward of the historic property. It's a huge asset, but when we had the Street Fest there, it really did beg the question, like, what is this building? That one's a big one. High Ridge Plaza is certainly a big concern of ours. The Village Country Inn recently sold, as well as the adjacent property, so that looks like that's set for redevelopment. Price Chopper has always been out there. We're a town with 1.5 grocery stores, really. The Price Chopper, it's got to be the smallest Price Chopper they own. So, that property is a really important one to us as well. So these are all the different pieces that we're working on. Pauline Moore in my office actually has a lot of conversations with developers. She's instrumental in putting people in touch. For example, we have one big parcel where we have local investors that would like to buy a property, and we have access to the people that own it. So we've actually put those two people in contact and have actually, as Pauline says, set the table. We've tried to offer some solutions, some ideas, and then we put these two guys in the room and say, okay, now it's time for the private sector to really work out the details of this. But that's something that people don't really see a lot of. And then also we recently met with a food company that's located over in Saratoga that's interested in coming to town.
Interesting.
And we've sat down with them, and we thought they'd be a really good fit. It's a family-owned business, and tried to encourage them to come to Manchester.
Well, we're really running short on time, but I think what I'm going to have to do is bring you back to talk about the future. We've had a good review of things that have happened in the past, but perhaps bring you back and talk about. Obviously, there's a lot of things to discuss about the future of Manchester, and hopefully you'd come back. I really enjoyed you coming on my inaugural show, and I'd like to thank you all for joining me on my first show here with Live and Q&A, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much. Thanks, John.
Thank you. Thanks.